Sandy Shocks is one of the unfortunate paradox forms that dropped down to UU in competitive singles. With flashier and more powerful Pokemon taking the spotlight, Sandy Shocks was not catching the attention of the player base very much, and has so far not met the usage threshold to be ranked in OU. But recently I have been seeing this Pokemon on the ladder a bit more, and in Smogon Premier League, the biggest singles tournament of the year, Sandy Shocks has been used 3 times. This isn't a huge amount, but it's noteworthy for a Pokemon ranked in UU. Interestingly, Sandy Shocks has been used the same amount of times as OU ranked paradox forms such as Iron Treads and Iron Hands. Is this Pokemon better than we initially thought? Let's take a look at what Sandy Shocks has to offer in the Gen 9 OU metagame. Like this video and subscribe to the channel for more informative content about competitive Pokemon. In a world of power creep and massive stats, especially on some of its fellow paradox forms, Sandy Shocks has a much lower, balanced and more reasonable stat distribution. Sandy Shocks has pretty low speed for an offensive Pokemon in Gen 9 OU, but it's at least enough to outrun most defensive Pokemon and pose a bit of a threat. It has a good special attack stat and decent defenses. Unfortunately, Gen 9 is a tough environment where stats like these aren't going to be enough to make you an OU viable Pokemon. You need to offer a bit more, fulfill some sort of niche that other Pokemon can't. And Sandy Shocks does have some unique qualities that give it a bit of merit and let it fit on certain teams. Sandy Shocks is actually one of the only special attacking electric types in the game. Rotom Wash is the most popular electric type in OU, but it's more of a defensive utility Pokemon. The only other noteworthy option would be Kilowattrel, who is a bit weak for OU and not used very commonly. Sandy Shocks is an electric type that can actually pose a bit of a threat in a metagame where there are quite a few common defensive water types, and the most popular and common Terra type is Water. Electric Ground is a unique type combination, granting you an electric immunity and a pretty nice set of stab types. Some teams appreciate having an offensive electric type and pivot with Volt Switch. Sandy Shocks also has access to Stealth Rock and Spikes, which is rare for a special attacker, though there are competing hazard setters in the format who are generally superior. Compressing the role of hazard setter and electric type special attacking pivot into one Pokemon slot is worth something. Pokemon like Sandy Shocks, with a very specific combination of traits that no other Pokemon has, can occasionally find a niche for themselves and be the perfect piece of the puzzle on some teams. Most viable electric types have some way in their moveset to threaten ground types. Ground types are immune to electric, so if you have no way to threaten them super effectively, you can be pretty easily countered. Sandy Shocks unfortunately suffers from this problem, with absolutely nothing in its moveset super effective against ground. This means Sandy Shocks invites in common Pokemon like Great Tusk and Garchomp, and gets pretty shut down by them. To get something out of Sandy Shocks in Gen 9 OU, you need to support it with the rest of your team. You need something that is solid against ground types, some sort of game plan against them, and also teammates that benefit from having Sandy Shocks as a teammate. When you look at the team brought by the player Lax, in week 1 of SPL, Sandy Shocks fits right in. This Sandy Shocks has Rotom Wash as a teammate, who is an excellent switch-in against ground types. It's also an additional Pokemon with Volt Switch. Pivoting is a key theme of this team. 3 Pokemon on the team have pivoting moves. Sandy Shocks and Rotom have Volt Switch, and Scizor has U-Turn. Chien-Pao is the big heavy hitter, who benefits from these pivoting teammates. It's frail and struggles to switch directly into the battle itself because of its poor defenses and typing. But with pivoting teammates, you can get it into the battle safely and take advantage of the massive offensive threat it poses. Sandy Shocks has a teammate that supports it against ground types, and Sandy Shocks also supports the rest of the team, allowing pivot opportunities into the big threat Chien-Pao. Another way that Sandy Shocks can take on the ground types is through Terastallization. This particular Sandy Shocks was using a Fairy Terra type, along with Terra Blast. Fairy is not only a great defensive type to shield you from incoming hits, it is also super effective against the 2 most common ground types in the game, Great Tusk and Garchomp. Since Sandy Shocks invites in these Pokemon because of its lack of coverage, this surprise Terra Blast will often earn you a surprise KO against them. Even though you need to spend your 1 per game Terastallize to do this, it's actually quite worthwhile for this kind of team. You not only eliminate their ground type, meaning Sandy Shocks can now use Volt Switch as much as it wants, allowing you many opportunities to get Chien-Pao in. You also remove their Rapid Spinner, meaning they can't remove your hazards anymore. This means every time you pivot to Chien-Pao, which you can now do much more easily, the threat of Chien-Pao is enhanced even further, since the hazards will rack up damage on every single defensive switch the enemy makes. This team was victorious in this game, although there are limited options in centralizing threats in Gen 9 at the moment, leading many of these SPL games to feel the same. That doesn't change a fundamental fact about competitive Pokemon. Sometimes using something unexpected is a huge advantage. Sandy Shocks is not a Pokemon that is really on the radars of many players at the moment, as something to consider when team building, and as evidenced by this SPL game, it can actually fit pretty nicely on a team aiming to target common metagame trends. That's why a Pokemon like Sandy Shocks, even though it's by no means a central metagame force, has seen a pretty impressive amount of usage considering how overlooked it was at first. Turns out this Pokemon can work if a team is built around its strengths. What do you think of Sandy Shocks? Do you think it's a new metagame titan that will change Pokemon forever? Or do you just think it's a solid Pokemon that can work with the right support? Who's your favorite niche pick in Gen 9 OU right now? And what would you like me to talk about next? Let me know down below in the comments. And thank you for watching. Thank you to the patrons. If you'd like to send me a team to look at in a video, or request a video topic for me to cover, take a look at my Patreon link in the description for more information. Like this video and subscribe to the channel for more informative content about competitive Pokemon.
The money got different, 'cause of what I'm spending. The money got different.
Oh, it's
'Cause of what I'm
Magneton!
spending.
Whoa!
The money
KO
got
by one
different.
hit! It
'Cause
scattered
of what I'm
spikes!
spending. The money got different.